I loosely just sat our front wheel in the vise here and put our front end up to it just to align the axle holes. Next up, we'll take our front axle and I'm going to give it a light coating of anti-seize, just to make sure on disassembly down the road we don't have any binding problems, we won't run any rusting issues. And I'm using anti-seize because this front end has sealed wheel bearings. If you have the old style wheel bearings that require greasing, just like our neck bearings we just installed, you'll just want to use the wheel bearing grease on the axle. So when that has a good coating, I'm going to take our spacer, line it up on this side, and run our axle through. Then we can start setting up our spacers on this side. The spacer, then we have our brake caliper. Put the disc in between the pads here. Lucky shot, and our last spacer here. All right. Now you want to check and make sure all the spacers move freely as far as the thrust spacers for this style caliper. Then what I'm going to do is put some blue or red Loctite. I'm going to use blue on the threads. Put on our axle nut. And I'm going to go ahead and torque our front axle to 60 foot-pounds. All right, with that torqued, you still should be able to move the brake back and forth. Now we can fasten our brake. Now I'm going to go ahead and mount the brake hardware. So first up, I'm going to use a little bit of Loctite on this heim joint fastener that mounts to the Springer front end. Loosely install that. Then I'll go ahead and mount that heim joint to the brake caliper mount. I'm also going to do the same. I'll put a little bit of blue Loctite on that mount. Run that through. Go ahead and tighten this up here. And then what I'm going to do, once I get this all snugged up, I'm going to torque it to 30 foot-pounds. And then I'm going to go ahead and torque the rest of this hardware, which means these two caliper mounting bolts and this guy back here to 30 foot-pounds. And we should be all set for mounting up our front caliper. With our front end all assembled now, I'm going to go ahead and just loosely mount up our handlebars. And that'll kind of give us an idea of where they're going to sit when we're installing other parts. Keep in mind, we're going to keep our front end bolted up together, but we're not going to finally adjust it until the bike is finished or completely assembled, so we can do our neck bearing adjustment. So our pinch bolts here are going to be loose. Our neck bearing adjustment's not going to be 100% on because we haven't checked it yet. I want to have the bike all the way together before we do that. Okay, our handlebars are all snug now, so what I'm going to do is make sure the front wheels tighten that vise, strap the front end down, and we can go ahead and get the bike up off the rack. With the front end all set up and that part of the frame off the ground, now we can put in the back wheel and make this into a roller. So we'll go ahead and take our rear wheel set it up in the frame. As you can see, I put one of the spacers here in the back, and I also put one of the both axle adjusters in place. And I'm going to set up our axle spacers on this side and run our axle through. And just like the front axle on the back, you're going to want to put some anti-seize on it pretty liberally. So you're not going to run any problems later on the road with disassembly when you have to change your tire. Put my axle spacers in place on this side. Now we'll do this side. I'm going to mount my rear brake caliper because this one mounts through the axle. Make sure you get the brake pads on either side of the rotor. Now you may need to check your clearances. On this frame, I actually got rid of a little bit of the paint there where the axle slides through because it was just a little too thick and threw off my tolerances just enough to make it a problem. Okay, once you play enough, get your axle through. Then I'm going to loosely mount this. We're still going to need to do our final adjustment when we get all of our drivetrain in so we can set up the belt or in this case, the chain. So loosely set it on there. You don't need to torque anything yet. And then I'm also going to loosely install my brake caliper mounting hardware. All right, that's all looking good and loosely in place. Now I can go ahead and take it off of the jack.